Hey, how you all doing? Well, I hope. Today I'm going to be talking about what I consider to be the best camera ever made for landscape photography. I'm filming on it now. So in this video I'm going to talk you through some of the features of this camera, tell you why you shouldn't buy one, which may seem hypocritical at the moment, and then I'm also going to do a vlog because I'm going to somewhere new today, which is an abandoned garden at Lerrin in Cornwall, which I've never been to before. I'm Tony Hull, professional photographer and a landscape photographer for over 45 years. So you might be thinking, well, if I'm a professional photographer, I'm bound to be using medium format digital, which is a very expensive camera, very high quality, very high megapixels, but they're so weighty, they're so heavy to carry around. No, I've owned 4 of those. I've owned 4 medium format digital cameras and the image quality is superb, but they're just not convenient. They're just too heavy to lug around. The lenses are heavy, the gear's heavy, and the files are actually too large for most uses. So I think unless you're an advertising photographer who perhaps works for Porsche or Rolls-Royce or something like that, then yeah, shoot on medium format digital. If you're a portrait photographer, because medium format digital has shallower depth of field, that can be very useful for portraits. So in fashion, yeah, in a studio, medium format makes sense. But for a landscape photographer who's got to lug loads of gear around all the time and who wants convenience and versatility, my camera is the Sony A7R5. Now, the Sony A7R5 is a fabulous camera, but I'm not saying it's any better than the Nikon or Canon equivalents. I'm not saying that at all. It has more megapixels at 61 megapixels, but that seriously is overkill for most uses. So the disadvantage with having 61 megapixels is you get very large files. And if you're doing something like focus stacking, then you may have 10 files for one image. You need a lot of computer storage space, and that is quite expensive. But of course, the advantage of having larger pixel count, 61 megapixels, is that you can crop easily. And since I've been making these videos for over a year now, I've really grown to love the 16:9 format for landscape photography. And medium format digital is 4:3 ratio, which I consider to be great for portrait orientation, so vertical shots. 4:3 is the best ratio, I think, for those, because 3:2 is slightly too long when you put it into vertical. But 4:3 for landscape orientation, for me, is all wrong. It's just not wide enough. So I prefer the 3:2 format or the 16:9 format. They're nice and wide, and I like that wide, expansive look that landscape images have. Of course, if you've got perhaps a 20 megapixel camera, you can do panoramic stitches to get higher resolution. So you can just put your camera in vertical format like this, take one shot there, move it around, take one shot there, move it around, take one shot there. You can keep going for perhaps 6 or 7 images and then stitch all those images together in Photoshop, and then you end up with a much higher resolution image. So there are ways around the resolution thing, but obviously with this camera it's just so much easier to switch it round to horizontal format, take one shot and then just crop the top and bottom off that shot. So obviously if I crop the top and bottom off this, then I've still got a good 30 megapixel image which will print to 2 meters wide, no problem at all. It's another grey day in the woodland. Oh well, I'm going to try something which I've not done very often in my life, which is zooming in whilst taking an exposure. So for this you have to have a zoom lens obviously, and set it up so that you've got roughly about a second's exposure. So for this shot I'm shooting at 1 second at f16. I'm just going to turn the zoom ring round while I'm doing the exposure. So press the shutter button down. Pretty interesting. Yeah, it's a gimmicky but quite a nice effect. Give it a try. It's worth trying it in woodland. One of the great features of this camera is the screen. It's absolutely fantastic. You can have it flat like that, so if you've got the camera basically near the ground, you can look at it easily. You can turn it away from the sun, so if the sun's glaring on the screen, you can just turn it away. You can turn it around completely like this and then put it into vertical mode so that you can be on the ground that way and have it that way. So it is a really superb screen, so congratulations to Sony for making such a fantastically versatile screen. But you know, I only use those extra little features of it on rare occasions, but I'm glad of it when they're on those rare occasions. But obviously you can get around that no matter what camera you've got. The other great thing that Sony did with this camera is they gave it a 60-second timer, so you can do long exposures at night or just long exposures with a neutral density filter, and they'll last for 60 seconds. Of course you can do this with a timer on your phone, so again it's no big deal. It's just very convenient, this camera. That's what I love about it. Plus, compared to medium format cameras, this camera you can put long lenses on, and there aren't many long lenses in medium format digital, and if they are, they're not as long as the equivalent ones on this Sony range. Now some of you may say, yeah, but Sony doesn't have specialist lenses like tilt shift lenses. But that's the reason I switched to Sony from Nikon originally, is because I could use my Canon lenses, which are tilt shift lenses, on this Sony camera with an adapter. It's so versatile, it's so convenient, and that's why it's the best camera ever made, in my opinion, for landscape photography. The other great thing about the Sony A7R5 is the video quality. Now, I'm a stills photographer. I only started doing video about a year ago because I just thought it would be a nice new skill to learn. So 3 years ago my wife died, and I thought, I'm getting old, you know, I'm 64 now. I need to start looking after myself. And one of the things to do when you start getting older is to start learning new skills. So about a year after my wife died, I taught myself bird photography, and I'm so glad I did. I got some pretty good bird shots, and it was a new skill because it's a lot different than taking landscape photographs. So I'm glad I did it, and then but I decided that, you know, because I couldn't make any money from it, and I'm really a landscape lover, I'd rather dedicate my time to landscapes. So that's what I did. But then when I started watching these vlogs on YouTube, and I thought, some of these people, I just didn't agree with what they were saying, and I thought perhaps I should start doing my own. So I started doing my own, and I had to teach myself videography, of course. I'm so glad I did, because again, another new skill, and it's got a lot of people watching my channel, which is great because I feel like I've got a lot of experience that I want to share, and I'm not going to hold anything back. I'm going to give it all away. So yeah, you might be like me. When a few years ago I would say to myself, why do people make these flipping cameras with video facility on? I don't even want video. But I'm now the opposite, and I've really enjoyed my days in videography, so it's something I'd recommend doing. Shut the front door. So is there anything I don't like about the Sony A7R5 camera? Yeah, there certainly is. Only one thing. It's pretty amazing. So that one thing is that you're shooting in video and then you want to go back to stills. It completely forgets what settings you were on, and I think it would be quite an easy firmware fix for Sony to be able to do that. love this camera, absolutely love it. It just never, it doesn't get in the way of anything, you know. It's just a tool which does its job absolutely brilliantly. Should you buy one if you've got a 24 megapixel camera? No, no way. I mean, I bought this because I sell large prints, so, or at least I did sell large prints. I haven't sold a print larger than 2 meters for about a year now. So I'm not so bothered about taking pictures that can blow up huge anymore. In fact, I applaud manufacturers like Fuji for bringing out a 40 megapixel APS-C, smaller sensor camera, because I think that might be the way forward. Because although full frame at the moment's better, I think because phones are so good now, I think APS-C might be my format of the future. So a few years down the line, I'll probably want an APS-C camera, probably a Sony or a Canon, maybe, with smaller lenses and less to carry around. If you're young and you've, you know, got plenty of money, then yeah, get a medium format digital or buy a large format film camera and lug it all around for years like I did. Crikey, I had a Bronica SQA, which was known as the poor man's Hasselblad. I had that for about 15 years and used to lug that around, and it was a really heavy camera. This is a 6x6 centimetre square film camera. I used to lug that around with an 80mm lens, which is a standard lens, a 50mm lens, which is a wide angle, 150mm, which is a short telephoto, and a 250mm, which is a longer telephoto. But it was so heavy. After about 2 or 3 hours, even when I was in my 30s, I would come home and I'd be thinking, goodness me, I'm completely exhausted. Whereas now I can carry this camera around and a tripod, and often I have to carry 2 tripods around as well to do this vlogging lark. So it's so much more convenient, and I just love the image quality, I love the convenience. It's a great camera. But unless you need that large printing capability, I wouldn't bother. Just stick with 24 megapixels, honestly. Get good lenses, get a decent tripod, and then spend the rest of your money on travelling around. I can't resist a bit of ICM, intentional camera movement photography, when I see lovely straight redwood trees like this. Now, of course, you can do this handheld. You need about a 1-second exposure and just shake the camera up and down. But I'm going to try it on a tripod to see if I can keep these pine trees really straight. So I've set the tripod perfectly level. I'll just check the horizon as well. That's not quite in. Yeah, that's perfectly straight now. So now I'm just going to do an up and down movement on the tripod during the exposure. So excuse the shaky tripod, but it's going to be something like that, and you can see that the trees are staying perfectly straight, not something easy to achieve when you're handheld. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, I'm overdoing the effects this time, aren't I? ICM, zooming in during exposure. I'm sure you've had enough of these. They are pretty much Marmite, aren't they? But I like ICM particularly. I'm not so sure about the zooming in and out during exposure. It's a bit of fun though, isn't it? And I'm outside, you know, I'm not sat around at home. I'm outside enjoying myself in the woods. It's flipping great. So I found this bog moss on the woodland floor here, and it's a terrible name for it because it's got beautiful starry kind of shapes. I always used to call it star moss until I found out that it was called bog moss. And luckily this 100 to 400mm Sony lens focuses pretty close, but it wasn't quite close enough. So what I've done is put some extension tubes on. And extension tubes they don't have any glass in at all. They just make the minimum focal length of the lens much shorter, so you can get closer to macro subjects. So they're a good handy thing to carry around. And this, for a pair that I've got on now, I can focus really close. and they were £32 for the pair. So you can obviously have different magnification according to what your requirements are. And I think it's a lot better than having to carry around a macro lens, which is a lot heavier. So I'll show you that shot now. So I'm at the abandoned gardens at Lerrin, Cornwall, and it's looking good because it's got a complete carpet of beech tree leaves that have gone golden and fallen, mixed with a few sweet chestnut leaves. I'm just trying to find a foreground to take a picture of where the fountain is. Presumably there were fish in there, or bathers maybe even at one point, I'm not sure. But I'll have to look into the history of it. It's not an easy shot to get, but I'm going to try one here. So I've just got that shot, which is pretty good, and I did a focus stack of 2 images just to make sure that the foreground was pin sharp. And now I'm going to go to another extreme, collapse my tripod right down so that it's on the floor, and I'd recommend, if you're thinking of buying a tripod, I'd recommend one that does this, because I absolutely love this feature. So it can go right down onto the floor when you get the legs right. Collapse, thank you. There we are, and turn that around. And now I'm going to see how close I can get to these leaves in the foreground with the fountain of the abandoned garden in the background. So I'm just going to switch my camera into, take it from self-timer 2 seconds to bracket focus bracket, which is basically Sony's name for focus stacking. And then I'm going to focus on the very closest leaf, which is down here. Oh, it does focus that close. In other words, it should do a successful focus stack of this. Press go and fire away. Yeah, I look forward to getting back to the office and putting those together in Photoshop and seeing a completely sharp image. So I've moved around to the edge of the fountain now, and the sun's appeared through the trees at the top of this woodland, and looks pretty nice. So I want to make the most of it and give a slightly starburst effect to the sun. So to achieve that, you need to change the aperture to a much smaller aperture. So I'm going to be using f/16 to give the sun a bit of a flared effect as it shines through the trees. I wouldn't normally use f/16 because the aperture is so small that you get a thing called diffraction, whereby the light scatters around inside the lens through such a tiny little opening, and this causes a softening of the overall image quality. So I don't recommend you using f/16 unless you have to. Hey, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye for now.